Welcome to the 19th episode of the Rain Race Podcast. Today we're going to be talking about the upcoming F1 silly season. We're going to be talking about news in the World Endurance Championship and IMSA WeatherTech SportsCar Championship. We're going to round it all off with some race recaps. I'm Chris Aurelio. This is Rain Race. Let's go. Episode 19 of the Rain Race Podcast here. I'm joined finally back alongside with Kyle Cuthbertson.
What's up?
All right. And also here again, Kevin Rollins.
Hi.
And because we are following a weekend of racing where he happened to be attending alongside Kyle, so I figured we could use his input. I did mention
Why
that.
is he special?
I don't know, because he's not he's been here 2 episodes ago, but he's here again. David Land is back.
There's been a whole lot of news. I'm kind of surprised you asked me on. I don't know if we're going to have a lot to talk about.
Right. I can sense a tinge of sarcasm in that. Anyway, so I just want to start off here. On this podcast, don't know if you can tell because I'm a pretty monotone, subtle guy, as these Kevin and Kyle like to point out all the time. But we do like to have some fun on this podcast. But there's a time when you've got to put the serious mask on and sort of just talk about things with a little bit of concern. Obviously, I'm talking about Robert Wickens' incident 2 days ago at Pocono. And obviously, as racing fans, racing drivers, they assume that risk, and it's brought up all the time. It's in a completely different league from any other sport that you'll see out there. When the helmet visor goes down, anything can happen. And while we always hope to never see anything like this, unfortunately, it ends up being the case sometimes. Nothing is inevitable. Obviously, when something like this does come up, you want to treat it with some concern. But I just want to read off the press release from IndyCar. At the time this is being recorded, this was from 2 hours ago. Schmidt-Peterson Motorsports driver Robert Wickens continues to be treated at Lehigh Valley Hospital, Cedar Crest, following injuries sustained in the ABC Supply 500 at Pocono Raceway on Sunday. An MRI was instrumental in revealing the most appropriate surgical course, and Wickens is undergoing surgery Monday evening for a spinal injury. And last night we also had some press release go out related to lower extremities, right arm, and spine injuries. So, obviously, Kyle and David, you were both there for that race. The fan response to it, obviously, at the track was very shocked. While it's not completely unprecedented that we've seen a car fly up in the air at Pocono, in fact, it happened in just 2015 with Kimball. I just want to get your take first off. We'll start off with Kyle here on just first immediate thoughts after the incident.
Well, while it was happening, I was sitting next to Matty Faust, who's a Hunter Ray fan, and me and him were obviously going crazy. We can when you saw the accident happening into turn 2, when they were side by side, you kind of expected Hunter Ray to go around and then nothing else. And when we saw Hunter Ray around, we thought, Wickens would drive on by. And then from my vantage point, I could see the car, the red top, the chrome, hard to miss, to go up in the air, and then I remember I screamed just out of just my response. I just yelled, and I was just in shock. I think me and Matt Faust were silent for a couple minutes after it. And Dave's perspective, he said he couldn't see it, and he saw it on the TV. But from where we were, I could see over into the tunnel turn there, and I had my phone recording it. I had the TV screen to look at, and I remember clearly seeing it with my own eyes, and it was truly terrifying. It's the first time that I've ever been at the track during something like this. Every time I've been there for a big accident, we kind of just knew right after the fact if they were okay or not. And one of the biggest things was the track screens that they were showing. They went straight to a camera angle of Hinch's in-car, showing Hinch how he was in distress. And I've heard a couple people say this. We all thought that maybe he had seen something that we haven't. Before we knew he hurt his hand, we thought maybe he saw something, because we didn't know. We just simply didn't know, and we were just thinking the worst. And it was probably a good hour until we heard any sort of news, and it was just all shocking. I think a few people around me were almost in tears. Hell, 5 minutes after, for a while, I was almost in tears. We were all worrying, and as I said, as a racing fan, this is probably anybody's biggest fears in the racing industry is for something like this to happen. But it happens, and we live in a racing world where we kind of falsely believe that this is safe because it is safer than it used to be. But times like these is when you remember it's never going to be 100% safe.
David, your take on these. I know you made an entire video, and as per usual, I'll link that at the top.
I might have
right
just
on
watched
YouTube,
David for an hour talk about this,
but well, yeah, just quick opinions on everything that went down yesterday, at least in terms of the incident.
Again, like Kyle said, I did not have a direct view of it, probably thankfully so. So I pretty much saw the same thing that the TV audience saw. I do remember, or as they were going side by side in that corner, I just remember thinking to myself, I'm like, this isn't going to work. Back out, back out, back out. Fortunately, never backed out, and they made contact. And I remember just going, oh, man, he turned him. It was like he got him in the wall, And then on that first angle, you kind of, looking back from Hunter Ray's car, you kind of didn't realize Wickens was involved more than just, turning him around. And then they cut to an incredibly violent impact. The incredible violence of it really was shocking to everyone. I had a few people who were at their first time in Pocono around me, and they were, this is a lap 7, and you get a very violent accident like that. It's not fun, and it's certainly not fun. Kyle said you had to wait, but I will say, and I didn't actually even say this in my video, but my immediate first thought was, I was encouraged. The roll bar was intact, very clearly intact. It didn't appear that the car ever rotated a cockpit towards the fence, because as we've seen in the past, that's where the life-threatening damage is usually done. Then the wait started getting longer and longer, and it started feeling a lot like it was in 2015 when Justin Wilson was killed. And the helicopter as well. I think that was a pretty worrying thing when you hear they're firing the helicopter up. You think, these are injuries that cannot be treated at the Infield Medical Center. They're probably pretty serious one way or the other. So I had the thought that I was like, maybe it's just a back injury, or maybe there's a back injury involved here, and they can't just, use an ambulance because of potential complications. So it turned out, at least from my original estimation, as the scenario that I kind of was, and I was very thankful and very relieved when they did that awaken alert thing. I think a lot of more people were as well. In fact, the crowd, once we knew he was all right, the crowd spirits lifted, and they were ready to see a 500-mile race. It was something. It was something.
Yeah, we'll be touching on the rest of that race later in the episode, but I just wanted to get that out of the way at the beginning, because if we don't get the serious stuff out of the way now, it probably won't be able to turn back down to that level at the end of the episode. But moving on to a more, not really cheery level, but just more of a neutral, interesting level here. We're going to talk about the F1 silly season, because, well, part of this came out before the episode that Kevin and I last recorded, but I don't know how. I completely forgot to put this in the outline.
3 a.m. Chris.
Well, I think it was like 2, something like that. Yeah, but you're partially correct on that one. But we're going to start off here with Ricciardo moving to Renault, and I certainly wasn't really expecting that. There was obviously talks about him going around. We heard Ferrari first, and we heard McLaren. I personally never really heard Renault come up in the talks. So we saw that he was looking at possibly leaving Red Bull. But yeah, that Renault announcement kind of caught me off guard. So he's going to be staying with the same power unit manufacturer that he's with this year. Obviously, Red Bull switching to Honda Power next year. Now, how that'll pan out for them, we'll have to see down the road. But yeah, again, just around the table here, Kevin, your initial impressions, even though this was 2+ weeks ago now, on Ricciardo moving to Renault Sport for next year.
Everybody's acting like it's going to be like the end of Daniel Ricciardo. It's not. Renault took over from a pretty suck-ass team. They pretty much evolved from Lotus, which was a suck-ass team.
No, they weren't. Lotus... What are you talking about? Lotus in 2012 was a race-winning team. Even in 2014, they were getting a podium. I think in 2004. I mean,
14 they were a terrible team, and then Renault took over, and they've gotten better and better as they have progressed, and they have progressed faster than most of the midfield to where now they are the class of the midfield. So
they're never going to be the top 3 though.
They're not going to be at the top 3 immediately. I can see it down the road, but Ricciardo has a lot to bring to the table when it comes down to it. And I think it's a good move for him. I think Red Bull's going to suffer with the Honda.
They won't.
They'll have their good tracks, but a majority of the schedule, they'll suffer. So I think it's a good move for Ricciardo to keep himself relevant. And, it's a win-win situation, really.
Honda plus Adrian Newey at Red Bull is going to be amazing. And what does Renault have? Renault is probably the worst engine on the grid. And you have the Renault engine, and Renault, and they're just going to be in the midfield like they are. And I think Red Bull going to Honda and being the only Honda manufacturer, I think that's more of a plus. But that's just me.
David, any opinions on that transfer right there?
I believe Ricciardo has made an Alonso tier career decision in F1. As Kyle pointed out, the Renault engine has been the weakest probably this season overall. I count... Now, many people have tried to correct me in the comments when I made my opinions about this, that Renault has race wins. Yes, they do. An Adrian Newey chassis. I think exactly. I credit Red Bull wins to Adrian Newey way more than I do Renault. I mean, the best case scenario here is that Ricciardo elevates Renault as well, so that there are 4 factory teams racing for the victories. But I see this as, like Kyle said, Renault staying in the midfield, Ricciardo, battling with the Perez's and the signs of the world, rather than racing for the wins like he has been the last few seasons.
I was going to say one thing. The big winner of this news is Renault, because they got a big star in Ricciardo, and I think Ricciardo's definitely going to, bring them up.
Hülkenberg is a strong driver pairing too.
Yeah, they're still going to. But there's going to be a stronger midfield team. That's why I didn't say it in the beginning, because I knew David and I had literally the same opinions on this.
I think give the Renault Ricciardo thing a year or 2, and they're going to be the class of the midfield, if not clinging on to the coattails of the big 3.
I'll bet you $20.
What do you think is going to happen to Red Bull, though, Kevin? That's the question here. Is it a step forward or a step back for Daniel?
Step back, honestly. I think Red Bull is going to fade back to the midfield.
Well, I feel like Ricciardo, performance-wise, next year, I think it's a step back. But I feel like right now, with the direction Red Bull's taking, I don't know if Ricciardo just thought there wasn't much progress for him to make there. Whereas if he goes to a full, I guess, I don't want to see factory backed, because I mean, F1's really a shaky world of what teams are factory backed and not. But I mean, I feel like this move to Renault is kind of just him, like you said, David, trying to make a statement, just like Alonso did with the McLaren move, where it's obviously a step down in performance, but there's hope and ambition that it'll be a better decision in the long run. Now, personally, I'm not sure. I don't really have any data to back whether or not that'll be a good decision or not. But I think that that's definitely the path he's trying to take right now. So the next big thing, that's probably the biggest news for the F1 silly season. There's no hiding it at this point, because it's also slightly old news at this point. But Fernando Alonso
hates F1.
He's going to IndyCar.
Well, there you go. I didn't even get to announce the legitimate announcement yet. All right. Anyway, Alonso.
That's fitting.
Alonso announced his retirement from Formula One at the moment. Now, I just want to point out that he said there's a possibility he'll come back should McLaren... Now, it's kind of weird the way he said this, because he said there's a possibility he'll come back if McLaren can step up their game pace-wise. But there is also a lot of people saying that his relationship with McLaren seems to be done. So him making that slight comment is just kind of a little bit weird to me, because he did say he'll keep his eye open on an F1 return if McLaren is able to step up their pace. And now, obviously, this opened up quite a few doors. First of all, it opened up a door at McLaren, but
actually, yeah,
more on the speculation side, it opened up a door on where he goes next. And 95% of the people, if you were to put a poll on Twitter right now, would say he is going to go to IndyCar.
IndyCar. Robin Miller told us he's going to IndyCar, so I'll take that.
Well,
the exact
Robin
quote
Miller's
is.
source?
But can you give me a source that isn't 8 up?
David, tell him the quote.
I said, "Is Fred coming next year?" He looked at me and he said, "Yeah." And they thought about it and he said, "Oh yeah."
Yeah.
I love the impersonation. I'll give you a plus for that.
A plus.
Because we grew up in the same part of the country, it's very easy for me to impersonate people from Indiana.
This is true.
Don't go start going into the roadsters where that golden days in my day. But
I'm waiting on David to impersonate me.
Yeah, not in this
I don't
episode.
know if I can do it, Kevin. That's tough.
Anyway, so I just want to talk about the doors that could open at IndyCar. Some of the names that we've that have been thrown out. We have Harding Racing, we have Andretti, and we have Ed Carpenter. Those are the three that we've seen the most of. Now, this is where it gets interesting.
He must really be going to Ed Carpenter because he followed Ed Carpenter on Twitter.
All right, Kevin.
Oh.
So the
Glad
point
you said it.
The point where it gets interesting is now there are people saying that Harding could end up being sort of an Andretti feeder series where Andretti could stick their Indy Lights drivers, but also possibly stick Alonso in there. But Harding's a Chevy right now, and Andretti's Honda, and there have been people saying Alonso doesn't want to be racing in a Honda again. There's been people saying Honda doesn't want Alonso. There have been people saying Honda's fine with Alonso. It's a very mixed bag of speculation, and there's not too much hard evidence because Alonso likes to keep everything hush and let people fight it out on social media.
I can understand why Honda doesn't want Alonso, and feel free to cut this. But if I said that this podcast sucked, you wouldn't want me on this podcast.
Yeah,
that's a good point.
Yeah, I mean,
that's a good point.
But yes, to be fair, it's two separate divisions of Honda. I mean, you have Honda Japan, which was in charge of the power unit for F1. Yes. You have HPD, Honda of America, who's in charge of the IndyCar side of things. So, I mean, David, you talked about. Didn't you bring this up, David? You said it was really Honda of America said no, we don't really have a problem with him running Honda engines in IndyCar.
Yeah, because Honda America is really the driving force behind the Indy program. Now, it didn't used to be when Honda originally entered IndyCars, and I think all the way up until the early days of the IRL, it was Honda Japan footing the bill. That's why there was races in Motegi. That's why you got amazing drivers like Shinji Nakano and Toru Takagi coming over here and driving. Hideki Muto was kind of the last of those drivers. But, eventually Honda America took that over. So there is a divide. The Honda program in F1 is the Honda Japan project at the moment. And obviously they are none too pleased with Fred. Rightly so, like Kevin stated, when you say a product sucks, when you're representing said product publicly, and as emphatically publicly as Fernando did, especially when Honda of Japan made the Indy 500 happen for Fernando to try to keep him happy. You could understand why Honda Japan doesn't want anything to do with him. But like you said, and like I've said, and like people who actually know what they're talking about, like Marshall Pruitt said, the Honda America is like, we see the dollar signs here. If we can put Fernando in the car, we're going to do what it takes to make it happen.
And also, the other thing I want to point here is that the closest thing we have to any complete hard evidence in we're not even completely sure this is confirmed yet. In fact, you said it's not confirmed. That I think it was September 5th that first off, Jenna Fryer, I think, was the first one to report it, and then Racer picked it up, saying that Alonso would be testing with Andretti at Barber.
The Honda engine?
Yeah, I heard
obviously. That. All I know is that Jordan Taylor would be a way bigger draw, and more people. We'd be talking about Jordan Taylor if he was coming. But no, this is still unconfirmed because it's Fred being Fred, and I think I wouldn't be surprised if Fred is a clickbait fan, because that seems like all he generates is clickbait, and I will gladly admit to being a part of the Fred. So Fred, if you're listening,
I don't think he is. I don't think he's listening to this channel. If he is, and you want to be on the show, hit us up on Twitter.
He might be listening because his biggest fan's on the show.
Well,
Enzo.
He's
my favorite IndyCar driver.
They must be friends.
Oh no, Bandwagon Kid returns.
No.
Oh no.
Is that an exclusive?
Oh no.
He's coming back, but only for this. Anyway, so I'm going to move on from Alonso and move on to his replacement. Carlos Sainz took over his spot at McLaren. I don't know if there's too much to touch on there compared to what we just went over, because that's a pretty set in stone.
Well, if you would have looked at it beforehand, you would have said that Sainz was next in line, because keep in mind he's still a Red Bull driver. So, before the surprise announcement that he's going to McLaren, it would have made logical sense that he was going to Red Bull alongside Verstappen.
Now, this is what we call a patented rain race leeway into Pierre Gasly. Yeah, it's returned. I don't think we've done one of those in a while. Pierre Gasly filling in Dan Ricciardo's spot at Red Bull. Now, he moved up the F1 ladder pretty quickly, although not as fast as Verstappen did. Actually, no, it's faster than Verstappen did, actually.
Yeah.
Because he just joined Toro Rosso at towards the end of last season.
Yeah, he jumped in at Malaysia last year for the first time.
So Red Bull's complete driver pairing next year is Pierre Gasly, and Max Verstappen stays in his spot at the team. So that's probably actually the youngest driver lineup in F1 at the moment. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I'm pretty fair in saying that you're not going to get a younger driver lineup than that. And I talked about how Ricciardo wanted to make sort of a statement by going to Renault, hoping that it's going to sort of dictate where his future goes, and hopes of a more promising future, more options in the future. And I kind of see that Red Bull's trying to go down a similar path, similar but different. Their path seems like it's pretty set in stone right now. They want to get some young drivers in the top seats and try to develop them into World Championship drivers in the future.
Well, with Gasly being promoted, this actually puts Red Bull, especially Toro Rosso, in a very precarious position, because Red Bull's been renowned for their young driver program, but their oldest in the ranks young driver right now is in Formula 3. So they really don't have anybody among their ranks to fill the spot. And also it's rumored that Hartley's on his way out because he hasn't really shown much of anything. So, there's a lot of speculation on where the drivers for Toro Rosso can come from, since they really don't have anybody that's ready.
You see, I think Brendan Hartley is the biggest thing out of Gasly leaving stuff, because now that Red Bull has two young drivers, now that Gasly is in a Red Bull seat, I don't think Toro Rosso has enough to fill two spots. I think they'll be able to replace Gasly, but I don't think they'd be able to replace Hartley unless they took from some other team's development group as like a Lando Norris or someone.
Yeah, and of course Lando Norris was on the verge of being promoted to McLaren anyways.
Yeah.
That was everybody's guess on who's going to replace Sainz. He could still replace Van Dorn because he's almost on his way out.
And then that was a thought too, is like they said that Van Dorn, before Alonso left, they said that Van Dorn would have been on his way out. So now that is he still on his way out, or is he not?
They literally said that Van Dorn's future depended on Alonso. This was quoted from Zach Brown saying that if Alonso stayed, Van Dorn was out. If Alonso was out, Van Dorn stayed. But I'm pretty sure they were anticipating promoting say Lando Norris, so they'd have someone with experience in the seat. But now that they have Sainz, who has been in the series quite a bit longer, I think Van Dorn's still out.
I don't know. I think Van Dorn and Sainz. Well, that's true. Van Dorn was a rookie last year. But I still think Van Dorn is a rookie last year. How he was ahead of Alonso quite a bit, and then this year hasn't been too far behind. He still hasn't been at Fernando's pace this season. But I think, you get into those situations where when you have your top driver like Fernando, I bet the car is more suited to something that Fernando would drive to, like a Van Dorn, which obviously is why Alonso would do better than Van Dorn. So I think if you kept giving Van Dorn time, he'd be a really good second driver like a Kimi. So I would be quite sad to actually see him go. I thought last year, but specifically last year, I think he did pretty good to be able to earn that seat.
And remember, he filled in for Alonso in 2016 when he had his concussion, and he did a fantastic job when he raced at Bahrain.
Yeah, I forgot that happened. That was the first race Van Dorn did, and I was like, yeah, that kid's really good.
Yeah, that's when he literally shoved his foot in the door.
Yeah, and he did pretty good with that crappy Honda, the ultimate crappy Honda.
But yet Lando Norris is still showing a lot more potential than Van Dorn has, because Norris has been very competitive in Formula 2. He's won races.
Well, to be fair, Van Dorn did the same.
Yeah. But here's the thing that I said is the development problem in F1, where it would kind of make sense if McLaren joined IndyCar to kind of use IndyCar as a development thing, because you got these teams of people like Norris, so like Pascal Wehrlein, when they're shoving drivers out and kicking them to like DTM or other series. I think maybe if a team like McLaren joined an IndyCar and put Lando Norris in IndyCar while their F1 seats are filled, and then when an opening comes in, they ship him back to F1. I think that maybe give him a motive to IndyCar.
I mean,
because they do have a problem where a guy like Lando Norris is ready for F1, but they have 2 seats that are full. So then what do you do with the guys? And that's why Pascal Wehrlein doesn't have a ride right now, because the lower seats are pretty much filled, which it's kind of BS that Ericsson has right, but that's another topic for another day. But it's kind of BS that Wehrlein was in the Mercedes development group, but then he gets replaced by a guy like Bottas. So, there are all these development problems in F1.
Well, Mercedes power.
Yes, but there are these problems and development problems in F1, is what I'm saying.
Well, if you were Mercedes and you picked a guy who had made plenty of good results with your power plants at a lower team versus a guy who's...
Oh, I'm not saying it's a stupid decision. I'm just saying if Wehrlein is in your development program, then take Bottas from Williams and then give a bunch of money to Williams to say, hey, put Wehrlein in this seat because we still want to keep him around. Because he was in the development ladder.
I can
Mercedes.
see why they wanted Bottas over Wehrlein, but Wehrlein did get screwed. And
he did get screwed. That's what I'm saying. Is drivers are getting screwed now because they're going to take experience over that. But now Wehrlein is left to have an F1 seat, even though he did pretty damn good.
My point on Lando Norris is the fact that he, just by looking at him, just by observing, he is Alonso's protege. He has worked very closely with Alonso, and he's almost like Alonso's handpicked successor, it seems. Because they have worked that closely together. I mean, look how closely they worked at the Rolex 24 when they were teammates. They both did exceptionally well. And then ever since then, they've had a really close bond. And Alonso's been there assisting him when Norris has been testing the McLaren F1 and so on and so on. So it almost seems like Norris is the handpicked successor at McLaren for Alonso.
So basically, to summarize that, Lando Norris is going to be replacing Van Dorn next year, or he is going to IndyCar, in my opinion. So,
and Norris is very flexible. I mean, we've seen how well he did at the Rolex. He was almost doing better than Kyle Larson did when he was with Ganassi.
That's not hard to do, though.
Well,
just saying.
You know what? As somebody who doesn't particularly like Larson, really fast.
You're taking an oval guy into. You're taking an oval.
But he did phenomenal in the night shifts at the Rolex. He did an amazing job, even though Dixon did carry the team.
That's a topic for another day.
Yeah,
does Dixon not carry the team, though?
Dixon did, too.
No, when does he not carry the team, is what I'm saying.
Okay.
The GTE car never driven it before, and he outdid every single one of the other 4 drivers.
Yeah.
The last thing I want to bring up was that Lance Stroll's father bought out Force India. Now, that team was in pretty pretty heavy financial complications, it seemed. In fact, I even saw one report saying that they were planning on pulling out as close as after the Singapore Grand Prix, I believe, so that they could have been preparing to pull out of the series after that if they couldn't find a buyer. Of course, Lance Stroll's father, who's also named, well, it's Lawrence, but shortened to Lance, bought out Force India, and that pretty much solidifies a spot for Lance Stroll to go to Force India next season.
Rest in peace, Force India.
Well,
can we talk about the real casualty in this situation? And it's something that not a lot of people have been talking about. Is the fact that Williams just lost their primary financial backer and are losing Martini as well at the end of the year.
That's true. And I was going to bring up who would replace Stroll at Williams, but that's speculation on its own.
Bring back Pascal Wehrlein.
Well, I was thinking that personally, but I'm going to try to avoid the speculation basis.
Ocon's still a factory Mercedes driver.
Yeah, that's true. We'll have to see how that all pans out. But I think it's finally time to move off F1, though, and onto something else. This should be a little bit quicker because there's not too much to go over and not too much to debate. But World Endurance Championship. So I'm just going to quickly touch on the 2019-2020 WEC calendar here, which was unveiled at Silverstone. Now, round 1 will be the 4 hours of Silverstone. Yes, you heard me correct, 4 hours. They shortened that race alongside...
Because of traffic.
No, it's not. Silverstone, I'd argue, is one of the better races. This year it wasn't that exciting. And
no, they said because of traffic.
Oh, because of traffic. I thought you said because of traffic.
Yeah, they were literally blaming it on traffic and daylight.
Okay. Second round will be in Fuji in October of 2019. That's still a 6-hour race. The third race will be the 4 hours of Shanghai. That's the second race that's been moved down to 4 hours. And then they'll be doing the 8 hours of Bahrain. Round 5, they're returning to Sao Paulo for the 6 hours of Sao Paulo, and that is in February of 2020. And then they'll be going to Sebring. They are returning to Sebring for the 1,000 miles of Sebring, running alongside IMSA. I'm assuming at least that they're running alongside IMSA. What?
It's going to be an 8-hour race.
Yeah, likely. I don't know. We'll have to see. Depends on the amount of yellows and everything. And then they go to Spa-Francorchamps in May 2020 again, and rounding it all off at Le Mans. So there's a couple of clashes on the schedule. The first major one being the 4 hours of Shanghai clashes with the Macau Grand Prix, what was the Macau GT World Cup. Now, don't ask me how the FIA manages to clash two events that are under the same sanctioning group, but they've done it again. They already said that there are talks, though, to hopefully eliminate that, whether Shanghai is moving the date or Macau. I'm assuming it's going to be Shanghai moving their date, but obviously with a GT race taking away that many WEC drivers, it wouldn't really be good for either series, so they're going to try to avoid that. The 6 hours of Fuji also has a clash, and that one is with Petit Le Mans. Kevin, I'm going to try to keep you from not getting so heated right now. But
how do they do that again when they know that all the drivers are so much against it? Do they not pay attention?
Well, FIA has had a thing against Petit Le Mans since at least 2011. Somebody in a Brazelton gas station must have pissed off Gerard Nouveau. That's the only thing I can... They probably spit in his freaking breakfast sandwich or something. That's the only thing I can assume, because they haven't been back since 2011. They haven't been interested in scheduling around it since 2011. I'm freaking glad I saw the real cars show up at Petit in 2011, because... it's so unfortunate that they can't... Hey, instead of Shanghai, why don't we run at Road Atlanta? Whoa, what a novel concept that would be.
The last major clash would be the 6 hours of Sao Paulo, which clashes with the 12 hours of Bathurst, another major GT3 race. So, again, doesn't really look good on either side, because we've seen it before when there's been clashes with Formula E and WEC. Another FIA sanctioned series. So we've seen it with Formula One when they had to move over the Petite weekend. It's just crazy. I don't know how they keep managing to clash over weekends from their own sanctioning body. But Bathurst is not an FIA sanctioned race. However, that one is still being scheduled next to Sao Paulo, and that's obviously going to hurt if it stays like that, because you have tons of GT3 drivers over there, tons of GT drivers in general, I should say, because it is an endurance race and there are multiple drivers per team. Yeah, not too much to go over on the rest of the schedule. One thing I like to point out is that there are no repeat tracks on the schedule like we saw in this season, where Le Mans and Spa have 2 races on the same season. Now it's all different tracks again with the return of Sao Paulo and Bahrain. So yeah, it's pretty much all I have to go over there on the WEC schedule. And last bit of news here. This episode has dragged on quite long, and we still have the recaps to go. Couple of switches in IMSA prototype. Pierre-Juan Mathiasen switched from a Ligier to an Orica. Now,
Smart boys.
this pretty much means that for the full season now, in the LMP2 class, correct me if I'm wrong, but it is a full Orica spec class in LMP2 full-time next year in IMSA.
Well, if you don't want that, encourage your manufacturers to build better cars.
Well, that, but you
Or
also...
don't write rules where they literally can't develop the cars. Oh, homologation, sorry. You can't tap on the car with a hammer, otherwise that's out of homologation.
Oh, I actually agree with David on that one.
Go back 2 episodes if you want to see the full prototype debate. But we also had...
No, that was stupid that they disqualified Rebellion for that.
Yeah, I would agree. Yes.
Kevin on my side with one little statement.
More unlikely news that came out of last week, and this came really quick, is that Juncos will be racing full season in a Cadillac DPI next year. He showed up at, what track was it that he showed up to? It was Road America, right? Which was only a couple of weeks ago, saying that he was interested in the future, and then last week there was only like a 2-3 week gap in between, and he says full season Cadillac next year. Cadillac haven't had as much success this season as they did last year, but still a very strong manufacturer, and it's nice to see another privateer there. And I think that could be a good program to work alongside their IndyCar program, sort of develop the drivers. I know we've seen multiple IndyCar rookies this year swapping between... Renee Binder, for example, just raced WEC at Silverstone. Didn't go that well for him.
I think he binned it too.
Yes, he did indeed. Under slow zone, actually, under a local yellow.
Slow zone procedure. Slow zone procedure.
But so yeah, there's a very really unprecedented news announcement that nobody was really truly expecting, I don't think. And then also we have Dragon Speed, United Autosport, and Ford all evaluating future DPI programs. Now, I just want to quickly touch base on this because I said in our episode where we talked about the prototype split, actually it was the last episode with Kevin, that I thought it would hurt the series overall. I didn't really see a need to split the classes up, and I said the only reason why it would be logical to split them up is if IMSA was pretty much just trying to completely abandon the LMP2 global spec concept and just try to get everybody into a DPI formula. And it's pretty clear with these recent announcements that that's probably the direction they're going for. I think that it's definitely smart on their hands if that is their intentions, because it seems to be working. Obviously, I still don't really understand why, because you kind of just screwed out some guys like United from running. I mean, they can still run Petite this year and fight for an overall, but they kind of just lost interest in running the rest of the season if they're not going to be able to come over next year for the Rolex 24 and fight for the overall, unless they build a DPI car, of course. So I think it's interesting. It's going to open up the doors. I even saw somebody saying Core would be smart to go ask Porsche if they could pull an ESM and just say, listen, we'll build the car. We just need your permission to put Porsche badging on it. So that, I mean, it definitely opens a lot of doors up for some diversity in the future. I'm all for it. Again, I'm not completely for the prototype split, but as I've said now 3 times, it's definitely interesting what we'll see in the future of this class.
The only positive I can really take away from a P2 DPI split is if they let the DPI cars off the leash. If they start opening up development areas, allowing them to start really turning up the wick, and may the best car win. Now, I'm worried about that for several different reasons, most notably the fact that Daytona's insurance doesn't let them run more than 200 miles an hour on the banking and all this other nonsense that, unfortunately, we're kind of stuck with in modern racing. But we'll see. I would certainly like to see kind of more GTP and less LMP2.
I mean, currently, now the DPIs are sort of a LMP 1.5. And let's face it, the global spec LMP2 cars, it works in Europe, but it's broken here. And, you know, I'm okay with it. I mean, we've seen people transition over. Yes, we had to sacrifice a couple teams, but I think it's going to make for a pretty decent show continuing next year. And everybody acts like it's a huge change. But when we look at the Rolex 24 next year, we're probably going to say this isn't that different than what we've been used to.
The problem with all of this now is that there's less opportunities. Fernando would not have been able to run the Rolex this year if he had to be affiliated with a manufacturer. The fact that he could just run a generic Ligier Gibson allowed United Autosports to essentially bring 2 cars. We know the Jackie Chan Joda team can't run or doesn't want to run next year if they can't go for the overall, so that limits them to essentially finding a Cadillac, which with the Juncos announcement now, where's an extra Cadillac going to come from unless they're paying Spirited Daytona to run their drivers? I mean, the opportunities are now shrunk, at least for now. I mean, of customer options out there in a DPI exclusive formula.
I mean, yeah, that is the negative. I mean, you talk about the Jota Sport cars. They literally shipped those cars from Bahrain, from the WEC race, to Wayne Taylor's shop in Brownsburg, Indiana. Then they shipped them and they just put new number panels on them and made some adjustments to the cars and then shipped those to Daytona. That is the negative, because now it kind of makes it very unlikely that a team will literally pluck a car from WEC, give it to an IMSA team to do some slight modifications to it for IMSA spec, and then just go to Daytona because they can't compete for an overall win.
I'll put it this way. Daytona finally kind of reestablished itself in the last few years as an international event once again, which it really hadn't been since the 90s. And now it's back to being a national event. And probably if I had to guess, Sebring will probably take its place back as kind of the event everybody wants to win in American sports car racing, because the Rolex will turn into such an American-centric event.
Moving on to the race recaps, finally. Pretty far into this episode already, but we're just going to take these in order. Starting off with the WC race at Silverstone. Now, I'm not going to go over qualifying or anything for any of these races because we're going to try to keep this pretty short and concise. But start of the race, pile up between Rebellion and SMP.
Again.
Can't remember, Kevin, which numbers of the cars? It was the number...
It was the number 1 and the number 17.
Okay, yeah, that's what I thought. Right at the start, sort of just a misjudgment. Now, overall, that race was not very interesting in the top class. And
I give it 2 stars.
We talked about hopefully them making the class closer with EOT adjustments. It didn't really do anything.
Somehow they did the exact opposite.
Yeah, well, to put it blatantly here, the 2 Toyotas had a 4-lap advantage over the number 3 Rebellion at the finish.
And then they had a 100-and-something lap deficit at the end.
Yeah. Well, this is where it gets interesting because both Toyotas were disqualified due to skid block infractions on the under tray of the car. Same thing that caught out Audi in 2016. Same thing that caught out the 91 Porsche in this race as well. Which means that the number 3 Rebellion inherited the win of the race. First win if you're counting it for a privateer. in the FIA WEC overall.
And it's the first win for the number 3, as in the actual number, since Spa 2012, aka the second WEC race ever.
Obviously, hoping in the future, and I keep saying this, but I hope that WEC can learn lessons from the past and really put an effort to make these classes closer. I mean, it's just a poor look for the series, I think, if you're having Toyota pull such gaps. They're really in a unique situation that no other series can say they're in, because they have such a wide diversity in the formulas and in the teams. Really just one factory team going up against a couple of privateers. You don't really see that on that scale anywhere else, even in F1. But yeah, hoping for the best when it comes to the next race in Fuji. Hopefully they can get those two a little bit closer.
Not that it will necessarily matter, but how close is the championship now between Rebellion and Toyota?
It's only a few points. I think the number 3 Rebellion is within like 3 or 4 points of the number 8 Toyota.
Yeah, so because when you get disqualified, it's going to kill you massively.
And also, Rebellion is within a couple points of Toyota in the Constructors' Championship now, too.
Oh, I mean, per season here, we could have tortoise in the hair. You think about Sebring coming up, and I think the next 2 races for the WEC, of course, is like the next 8 months for the WEC.
No, it's Fuji, Shanghai, and then Sebring. But yes, close enough.
Just from now. Okay, yeah. but you can look at a Fuji as that's a race where you can have a monsoon hit in the middle of the race and potentially take out a couple cars. Let's imagine one of them is a Toyota. You go to Sebring. Toyota has never, ever, ever raced there. Rebellion has. Several times, in fact.
I mean, also look.
They know how to prepare. Sebring's gonna break the Toyota. I guarantee. If they show up, if they show up, I'm still not convinced they're gonna show up.
I think they need to get testing hours in there before, because that car has never touched. Toyota themselves as a team has never touched Sebring, so they really should. I mean, if they want to be serious in this championship, now I think that's overestimating it and everything, because obviously they'll likely still have that pace advantage going into the future races, unless there are some more massive changes made. But if they want to be logical and actually, I mean, especially because Sebring offers some bonus points that the other races don't, if they want to fight their absolute hardest, they should be going out to Sebring and putting in a test. But I'm going to go over the rest of the finishing results in the classes here. Just LMP2, 38 Jackie Chan DC Racing Orica won over their sister 37 car. In GT Pro, what I'd call the best class of that race. I mean, that was kind of just up to any manufacturer, really. BMW kind of hurt a little bit, but Aston was up there, so that was pretty cool to see at their home track before they ran into some issues. But AF Corsa, number 51, won in that class. And in GT AM, it was another Porsche victory, the number 77 Dempsey Proton Porsche, after the Project 1 Porsche got pole in that race. So, that wraps up that. Switching over to IMSA here, the number 25 BMW M8 GT picked up their first win of the season. The first win in international competition for the M8. They finished ahead of the number 3 Corvette, which inherited the point lead again because it was a poor day for the number 67 Ford, finishing second to last overall and in class. So the title fight between Corvette and Ford sort of still rages on. Only a couple races left in the season now. They're going to Laguna Seca. And is there another one between that and Petit Le Mans? I can't remember now. Yeah, I'm like 90% sure. But if it's wrong, then I ate my words. In the GTD category is a win for Lexus in 3 GT Racing, the number 14 car. Kyle Marcelli and Dominic Bauman in the Lexus RCF. Last thing of the episode, and we're actually going to do a little bit something special at the end of this. Just quick championship predictions. Yeah, I didn't even tell you about that, but there's 3 races left after this. So
it's like Christmas morning.
Yeah. Well, anyway, so we'll get to that in a few minutes here. But Pocono, I've talked quite a bit. So I mean, personally, Pocono, it was, for me, an okay race at best. I mean, obviously, after the lap 7 incident, it was a green flag run all the way to the end. I don't think anybody could have ever predicted that in a million years. But everybody kind of just seemed to take it easy after what happened, the second yellow flag. The only other real notable thing, I'm going to point this out, Kyle, but Rahal and Piggott at the start didn't even make it to the line before there was a pile
look out! A crash before the start of the race!
And Power was blaming, or
Dixon was blaming Power.
Dixon was blaming Power.
That's the thing,
Power said, I have the data.
Rahal didn't even blame Power. That was Dixon that said that.
I didn't say Rahal blamed Power. I knew that it was...
Guys in the front, what does that mean?
But I will say, Piggott, if you watch Rahal's visor, Piggott, it just looked like he stomped on the brakes. And it didn't even look like Rahal was trying to time it. It looked like he was, like they were all synchronized and going, and then Piggott just got on the brake. I don't think there's any way for Rahal to avoid that. So,
my video, I'll say it here. They need to get rid of the 2-wide start at Pocono.
They do.
Do an Indy-style start, 3 wide, 100 rows between the rows, and I guarantee you they'll have a safe start.
100 rows between the rows. That's what you just said.
100 feet between the rows.
I agree with that. But they gave Rahal a contact, but I don't think anybody could avoid that though. Maybe if they were like more spread out and he,
if race control didn't tell him to pack up.
Well, when we restarted, we had like 14 cars on the lead lap. Kanan went out because of it was mechanical, and we lost Piggott because he couldn't come back, and Rahal was like 4 laps down. So we basically started out with 10 cars on the lead lap, is what I'd say. Is what we started out with, and a
lot of the cars had to come into the pits and repair debris. At Pagano, they were checking the front brake rotor on his car, and there were some major repairs that were done to the front of Ed Jones's car.
Right, and I said this at the track because Will Power and Alexander Rossi drove a flawless race. I have no clue how they lapped the whole field like that. Because, David, you're at the race, you can kind of agree. Alexander Rossi and Power, they basically flew away. But then...
I've seen an IndyCar race like that in a long time.
And then 3rd place to 7th was a great race. That was such a good 5th. 3rd to 7th was such a good race. It was so entertaining just to watch 3rd to 7th. And I don't understand how Power and Rossi got that far ahead, and then how the rest of the field were so packed up and had such a great battle.
If you think about
Marco was holding them up.
No, Marco wasn't
for a certain point.
Look, if you think about it this way, the big Wickens crash took out probably most of the people who would have contended with Rossi and Power at the front of the field. Everybody else probably, had all the cars been in the race, probably been running somewhere between 7th and 15th. And considering the fact that pit stops are such an important part of Pocono, it doesn't really surprise me in the least bit that we saw the 2 kind of best super speedway drivers, and certainly the 2 teams that look like every time we come to a super speedway, they're some of the fastest teams who were able to pull away, especially when a lot of the competition that again you would see at the front of a super speedway. Hunter Ray runs up front at Pocono every single year, and Wickens in Indy and especially Texas kind of proved that he's got chops on the super speedways as well. So once you lost those guys from the race, you kind of lost anybody who was going to challenge Power or Rossi at the front.
I think the biggest takeaway from Pocono, basically the recap is, Rossi and Power took off. The one thing is we did get that exchange to the lead a little bit past the halfway point, which made it more interesting. But I think we all knew that it was going to be Rossi's race. But the big takeaways to me after the race is Rossi made it clear that he's still in the title contention. That Dixon's going to have to earn this 5th championship. He's not just going to walk away, and that I've talked about a few times, few episodes on you get those championship drives, and I think Dixon had a championship drive at Pocono because at the beginning of the race he pitted and went back to pretty much the last place, and on the start of the race in the first stint he went from almost last to 8th, and then when he was sitting in 8th, the points was down to 14. It was down to a lot. And then through pit strategy and just running his race, a clean race, he finished third, and now the points is 29 points. So he definitely had a championship race where, you know, if he would have finished a few positions back, it would have been a lot closer than it is now. So the championship fight's heating up, and it's going to be fight night in Gateway once again for the championship.
I'll say this. Dixon knows what to do. He realizes that, you know, he can't win the championship, but he could almost certainly lose it in one race. So really, it's not about going out there and winning every single one. But you know, win's great, but he's pretty much doing damage control, because if he can't win the race, which was obvious he wouldn't, it's pretty much minimizing the amount of chunks that Rossi took out of his championship. And he did that very well. I mean, he realized that he had a big gap in the middle of the season. And he's utilizing that. He's literally being patient about it, but at the same time, though, he's not letting himself lose too much. And he is having a very, very championship caliber run. He's doing a hell of a lot better than he did last year, and he had a phenomenal last year, even without a sponsor.
Well, here's where we get into championship predictions, because it's really going to come down, I think, to 3 guys, but I'm going to say it's only going to be 2, and that's Dixon and Rossi. I know I'm playing it the boring way, but you look at the 3 races that are coming up, and I think Gateway, I think that's a Rossi track. I think you look at the performance that he put down at Phoenix. Gateway is not entirely similar, but I feel like Rossi, what you need at tracks like Gateway, and we saw last year when Newgarden put that pass on Pagano, you need a driver who's willing to take a chance, you need a driver who's daring, and right now Rossi's the one chasing. He's not the one being chased. And Dixon, for him to go out at Gateway and start throwing down moves like that, risking his car, I don't really think it would be in his best interest. So I certainly think that's something that we'll see Rossi trying to do, similar to what he was doing back at Phoenix. So I feel like that's going to be advantage Rossi at that track, close the gap up a little bit. It's just going to be a question of how much Dixon can hold on and salvage points from that race. And then you go to Portland. That's a tricky one. I mean, if I had to pick one driver for that race, I'd say Newgarden, but I think he's out of this, not out of it, but I just don't think he's going to be up there altogether.
You
so I'm going to say
double points, Mr. Really.
I'm not forgetting about double points, but I don't know. I think that track's going to be a toss-up. It really depends, because we haven't really had any previous races there in the past 10 years.
Yeah, I think, honestly, that, if anything, it would favor Dixon.
I mean, I was sort of leaning towards Dixon, but that's the biggest toss-up. And I'm just talking about the top 2, obviously. I'm not even talking about who's going to be winning these races. It's just about who I think has the advantage going out. But
and then we get down to Sonoma.
Sonoma,
it's another toss-up.
Historically, it's definitely favoring Dixon. But I feel like that's a track overall that Rossi could really shine. And it's double points, like you said. So it could be really close. It's tricky, because I really want to say Dixon for Sonoma as well, but I'm actually going to go Rossi's going to have the advantage at Sonoma. And it's going to come down to double points. I hate that it's going to come down to double points, but I mean, that's rules for
you. You know what it's going to come down to?
What's that?
It's going to come down to that brake lockup that Rossi had at Detroit.
Yep.
Where the championship was decided.
Well, if that's the case, that'll certainly be one for the storybooks, but
I will say this. In terms of promotion, this is perfect for IndyCar. I mean, you have the guy who's been around forever versus the guy who almost was like an accident. I mean, this is like WWE-esque crap. I mean, It really is. You got the guy who has been oh so successful, who has defined a generation of IndyCar drivers. And then you have the new guy, the guy who pretty much failed at everything else. Then he won the biggest race, and ever since then he has stuck, and he has been a fantastic driver.
Do I need to channel my inner Derek Daly and tell you guys about this is why IndyCar is great? We have these real-life human drama stories unfolding right in front of us. And this is why motor racing and IndyCar is great. Do I need to sit here and start blurting that out?
No, you don't.
Oh, but hey, you know what? Here's what I'm going to say, Chris. I think I'm a little bit on the opposite end of the spectrum to you as how I think this championship is going to play out. I agree with you that Gateway is going to be a Rossi track. I wouldn't be surprised if he wins. We've also seen the pace of Dixon on the short ovals. Phoenix and Iowa this year has not been great. I think a lap down at Iowa, and I think he was a lap down at Phoenix, mid-pack. So I think advantage Rossi for Gateway. Portland's going to be interesting because, as we know, Dixon is one of the few drivers in the series that has experience at Portland, particularly in a championship or IndyCar or whatever you want to refer to them as. That being said, Rossi's been one of the better drivers on the natural terrain road courses this year. Scott Dixon's advantages have kind of come on the street side of things rather than the natural terrain road courses. But I think you could almost see Rossi taking that race from Dixon as well. Maybe not a win, but I wonder. It's all going to depend which team has a better setup, whether it's Andretti or Ganassi for that particular track. And looking at the teammates that Rossi has, I think he's going to have better data, which will probably help them put a baseline setup that's better out of the box than Ganassi. I think, again, that's a Dixon track, and I think we saw in 2015, I think Dixon knows how to points race, particularly with double points, and presumably will still either have an advantage or have such a small disadvantage that as long as he finishes ahead of Rossi, he'll win the championship. So I think that's what we'll see. I think we'll see it be very, very close coming to Sonoma. Dixon will win on double points, unfortunately.
Hey, David, just remember, if Dixon wins the championship, it's because of Mike Hull.
Nah. I was pointing out Mid-Ohio, but I mean, that.
I'll say this. The one thing that I've noticed is where Dixon is weak, Rossi is strong, and vice versa. They've been playing off of each other's strengths and weaknesses.
Well, and they're 1-2 in the championship for a reason. Of the best two cars in the series. And Newgarden is third for a reason. I'm going to point that out now.
And this is this is IndyCar's version of the Vettel versus Hamilton. It really is. And it's a fantastic battle. I mean, as for Gateway, I can see it going more so Rossi, but I can see Dixon being up there as well. I mean, I can see it being a situation like it was at Pocono. Rossi is stronger, but Dixon is still there and minimizes the impact. Portland, I see it going Dixon's way. And Sonoma's a toss-up. If it comes down to a fuel mileage race, it's down. It's Dixon.
Well, let's just point out that all.
Are you sure about that?
We've all just kind of said, Gateway's a Rossi race, and then the two after that are probably a toss-up. So,
anyway, finally, we're gonna wrap it up for this episode. It's been quite a difficult one. It's gonna be a very difficult one for me to edit.
It ended up being like 45 minutes. We recorded for 2 hours.
Well, yeah. Well, I've been recording for an hour and 25, so that'll show you. I mean, if we're only about 40 minutes into this in real life, then there you go. It shows you how much we've had to cut out. But anyway, appreciate all tuning in. You can check us out on Twitter at Rain Race Podcast. And I'll have these three guys linked at the top right on YouTube, as always. Anyway, hope you all enjoyed this episode. Next episode's episode 20, so it's not really significant or anything, but hey, we've made it this far. Let's try to keep this whole thing continuing.
Shout out to Frankie DeStarlo that said we'd go like 4 episodes.
All right, yeah, there you go.
Oh, yeah. Next episode will feature a recast from Gateway, in which I will be attending.
That is true. That is true. Anyway,
I'll try
thank
to
you
get
all
some interviews and shit
for tuning in. And
Kyle and I will be bringing some freaking trophies back from Newcastle.
Right.
Kyle,
yes. Bring in the good word. We got the Rain Race Podcast on both carts. Anyway.
Into a victory, we're going to be slapping Napa Auto Parts stickers on that damn thing. Mike Hall's going to get me that W.
Thank you all for listening. This has gone into a ramble fest, but we'll catch you in the next episode.